Let's get into the why and how we're going to attach the cuffs to the sleeve. If you're in the complete shirt making course, you've already gone through the pattern making to make the sleeve and make the placket in the sewing section. For those of you who are just enrolled in the cuff and collar replacement course, you don't need to know anything about pattern making. In this particular pattern, I've marked off the seam allowances 1/2 inch because I know I use the flat belt system, and how I got to the distance of the pleats was to calculate. In this particular case, I have a 10-inch cuff, so I have a 10-inch cuff, and I decided that I want 2 inches of ease, which makes it 12 inches. And then I have 1/2 inch seam allowances, so I need to make this from edge to edge 13 inches. And that's what I did initially. And the thing is that even though I've made my cuff 10 inches and the placket is a particular size, but yours may be narrower, it doesn't make a difference, believe me. I'm going to show you something about that this system, you don't have to be perfectly accurate. Now, why am I saying that? Because when you finish sewing your sleeve, in this case here, I've included my placket, and I have not marked any pleats yet. And the reason I'm showing you this is because normally these would have marks on them for the pleats that you see here. But I'm going to show you how it came about. So what I do is I take my cuff and I walk it. In this particular case, I have the 1/4 inch extension, and I'm walking it. And when I come to the end, what I do is I'll lay it flat, and I will get my ruler and measure off what the excess was and see how much that is. That's 2.5 inches. So normally, I know that if I have 2.5 inches, I would come over here to my sleeve on the placket size. That's the big size, for those of you who are in the pattern making course. And I would mark off a line somewhere near the placket end, 1 inch, 1.5, make a 9 there. And then I know that it's 2.5 excess ease. So I'm going to make 2 pleats at 1 1/4. So I'm going to mark off 1 1/4. That's my first pleat. Normally what I do is I separate them by about 1/2 inch, 3/4. This is going to be the separation. In other words, that's where the next pleat's going to start, 1 1/4 inch. So now I have taken up that space that was excess on the total measurement. And what you normally do is you bring one of these marks over to the other and iron it, and then you can stitch it. You don't have to really iron it. You can go to the sewing machine and do all this, and then your second one. Now, in the beginning, when you're first learning, you're apt not to be too accurate. I would go ahead and stitch one first, and then what I would do is I'd walk it again and see how you're doing, and then do the second one again. Fabric has a little tendency to stretch a little bit, so I think you'll be safe. Once you stitch them, then you're ready to go ahead and put your cuff on. That's how easy it is. Now, the same thing with the one that's closed, both ends are closed. You would again go ahead and insert it. Now, one thing to remember is in this particular method, this is 1/2 inch from the edge. So the seam allowance is going to have to be wider than the 1/4 inch. You're going to have to allow initially. You have to know where you're starting at, whether you're using the 1/4 inch, this one here, or you're using the closed method. If you're using the closed method, this seam allowance has got to be 1/2 inch because you're going to lose on the sleeve length. So in other words, you're tucking it in and you're stitching the edge, and that's exactly what you'll do. All the way to the edge, and then you'll be stitching on the edge, and as you're going along you'll be folding your pleats and tucking under. And we'll get to more of that when we actually get to the sewing machine. I'll show you how it works, but just to give you a brief overview, for those of you who are starting out or are just going into the cuff and collar replacement, what's going to happen to you when you receive shirts for cuff replacement is that you'll get them, and you'll take them off, and you'll find that two of the pleats are intact, but one of them you don't know where it's at, because when you walk it, I'll show you the example here. When you walk it, you're going to be long because you didn't see the third pleat. And so that pleat that's missing, you have to mark off the excess. In this particular case would be 2 inches. That means this final pleat will be 1 inch. And what you could do is you would mark off 2 inches, and you would bring it over in this particular case. Now this is going to be again, and then you would sew your pleat, and then this will fit in this cuff. That's if you lose track of it when you're disassembling or when you're removing the cuff from the sleeve. Keep track of things, make notes of them. When these cuffs come in, they're ragged and frayed and stuff, you can write on them, you know, just whatever the measurement is. Just make notes to yourself. If you have a retentive memory, more power to you. I'm not one of those who remember a lot of things. I'm always writing things on the fabric. Hey, let's get started. First of all, we're going to be demonstrating the two different types of cuffs. One is the closed end, where they're tucked in to the wrong side, and then a top stitching is done. And the reason being is because the sleeve, when it goes in, will stop at the stitch line. It gives the newbies or the beginners an easy way to stop and gauge your actual equal seam allowance from top to bottom. And the other one is what I call the, in this particular case I have a 3/8 extension, but I like using a 1/4 inch, but either way 3/8 or a 1/4 from the edge, and then of course you'd have a right side to right side, you'd turn it to the right side, and you would edge stitch, and I'll demonstrate that. But it's important that in this particular type here, that you start right next to the clean edge, or the place where you're going to top stitch, right in there. A lot of times what I do is I open it up a little bit to the side. Let me see if I can just hold it so that I can get right next to it and stitch it. So that's very, very important. And then maintain your 3/8 in this case all the way through, and making sure that you get edge to edge. Let me bring a sample in here that again, let me show you that you do get a clean edge, edge to edge, edge to edge. You need to start them equally, and that's important. So let's get going with the first one. The first one is this one here has been turned to the wrong side, except in this case they did not tack it down. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that my seam allowance on my sleeve is at the edge of the seam allowance here, so I can get an equal seam allowance all the way through. Again, starting is the most important part. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the machine on, and we'll go ahead and get going on this. So now normally you have a pleat, but let me go ahead and just get with the button side again. So I'll start with the button side. As you can see here, there's the button side. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start it. And again, I can't stress starting it. Let me see if I can get it here. Make sure that you start it side by side. Make sure, absolutely sure, and at the same time I'm going to open it up and make sure that you start it right at the edge of the seam allowance. So let me do that. And I'm going to be using contrasting thread. You would use matching thread. And I'm going to drop my needle. And I would use a very small stitch. So again, I'm going to try to keep my hands out of the way. Again, I'm going to open it up and show you that I'm going to sleeve edge to seam edge underneath, and go ahead and do my edge stitching. And drop your needle every time you're adjusting. Now again, I showed you how to test for your pleats. Again, I'm going to keep my hands out of the way. And just keep going. And now you can see how long it is. My buttonhole side is longer. That's because I haven't closed my pleat. This is how shirt makers normally work. They fold it as they're going. They might fold 2 and gauge, but in this particular case, all I need is 1. And again, matching the edge of the sleeve. If you had the other type, it would just butt against it, and it wouldn't go beyond that. So again, make sure you get it in there equal. And I keep talking about the T-pin. The T-pin is a little tool that I have near that I always can make sure that I have it equal there. So again, I'm going to edge stitch it. I'm hoping that all can see it on camera. And back tack. And this particular one, that's how easy it is. Most students prefer this method because they either have a stop. In fact, I'd recommend, if you're just starting out, to have a stop. That means stitch both parts of the cuff so that when you push your sleeve in there, it won't go beyond the stitch, and you'll get an equal seam allowance all the way through. And anyway, that's the way this one is. It's pretty simple. Let's continue with the next one. The next one is going to be the seam allowance. I'm going to bring in a sleeve, and again, let me show you the this one here. I just want to make it perfectly clear. Make sure you get them side by side, starting and stopping side by side. Now, again, I'm going to state, don't do any top stitching or edge stitching until you've actually sewn it in, because, or if you do it, stop before you get to the end of the cuff, because you wouldn't be able to insert the sleeve properly. So that's very, very important. But anyway, we're going to bring in you'll see the sleeve, and it's got 3/8 seam allowance again. The important part is starting it. And let me get some of this stuff out of the way so you'll get a clear view of what it's all about. So, first, I'd like to talk a little bit about the actual pleat. In this particular case, we have three pleats, and it may be different in yours depending upon how you pattern designed it, or whatever came off the original, or in a case where a customer is sending it in, you may either trim the sleeve width, or you may make a bigger cuff, so you'll have to manipulate the width of your pleats. But in this case here, what we're going to do is I'm going to start with the button side. Again, edge to edge. I can't stress that. Get it edge to edge. And let me see if I can clean this up a little bit so it looks clean. And you want to make sure you get them edge to edge. And normally what I do is I get on top of it, and then I hold it together. Use my lever to lift and drop my needle, and back tack. And this is the important part. Again, I recommend a flat table like this because you have your hands free. Now, the whole thing in here is to open it up. We have a 3/8 seam allowance in this case, and to be accurate. Now, I'm hoping to kind of keep my hands out of the way again. And I have my pleats. Now, you may want to glue these pleats down. I don't use any pins. And I'm going to show you something. You can see where I'm short. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to make one a little bit wider, and I'm going to gauge it. I'm going to see if I can get my hands out of the way. In this particular case, you can see I'm about 3/4, ½ inch too short. So, and this is what shirt makers do. They don't use any pins. They would proceed. And once they get to that pleat and they drop it, then they would come and gauge again. Let me see if I can gauge you again. And they would make this pleat here. I had glued that one down, but you'll make it bigger. And again, you'll put it down, and you can see it's not wide enough yet, so you'd make it wider. And 3/8, and you would drop it. Drop your needle every time you're adjusting, and then you go to the end. And I can't stress, make sure that both edges are side by side. Again, you can open it up just like I'm doing here. As close to the edge without being on top of it, and then back tack. And let's see how we did. Starting and stopping is the most important part. Again, let's close it. I have my T-pin. This is normally what I do, what shirt makers normally do, is they stick it in. You can see where it's lining up nice. You drop your needle, back tack. You make sure that the clean edge is just a hair past that, and edge stitch it. Again, I'm going to try to keep my hands out of the way if possible. Again, I'll edge stitch it, just a hair past it, and then I'll go to the end and use your T-pin. Make sure you cover that first stitch you did, and edge stitch it. Now, if this was the final stage of your cuff, what you would be doing is you would turn, if it was the same thread color already. If you had 10 different shirts, 10 different colors, you'd probably have all red. In this example, the first stitch would be red for everything. And then when you went to the final stage and you were attaching your cuffs and collars, you would switch to the matching thread. And at this point here, you would turn it, and you would continue all the way around with your edge, your top stitching. And that's how simple this particular type is. I can't stress to test yourself. You're going to be inclined to probably think, well, I'll pin them. I can't tell you what to do, but I will tell you, if you're in this business to make money, time is against you. And if it's going to take you 15 minutes to make a cuff because you want to pin them and all that kind of stuff, you're never going to make it. And you're going to have to charge more money because it's taking you longer, and you're going to lose business. So teach yourself to be efficient. It's fast. It just takes a little practice, and that's how simple it really is. If ever you have any questions, just send me an email or give me a call.